morning, everyone. Okay, discussing wild hearts and fierce minds, the journey of India's women wildlife warriors. This session celebrates the inspiring stories of India's women wildlife warriors who have dedicated their lives to protecting the country's rich natural heritage. From conservationists and forest officers to activists and researchers, these women are breaking barriers and challenging norms in the fight to preserve India's biodiversity. I, Cheryl Cosmos, warmly welcome you all to the 6th edition of the Orange City Literature Festival, organized by the SDR Knowledge Foundation, powered by Raisoni Education. Let's welcome our guests Anita and Zai Whitaker. Today, we are honored to have Madam Anita Mani. Madam Anita Mani is a publisher and the author of A Woman in the Wild, Stories of India's Most Brilliant Women Wildlife Biologists, a book that celebrates women who have dedicated their lives to wildlife research, protection, and preservation. Madam book explores the intersection of wildlife and women in wildlife and highlights the achievement and challenges faced by the women in conservation. Please join me in welcoming Anita Mani. Next, we are also honored to introduce Madam Zai Whitaker. Madam Zai Whitaker is a writer, conservationist, and managing trustee of Madras Crocodile Bank Trust and Center for Herpetology. She has written many books for children and the adults, including Andaman's Boy, Kali, and the Rat Snake, and Cobra in My Kitchen. With such a fascinating subject, we might find ourselves so absorbed that time slips away unnoticed. So please join me welcoming Madam Zai Whitaker. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further delay, let us dive right into today's session. Over to you, dignitaries.
Anita and I go back quite a long way. Actually, in time, it's not a very long way, it's 2 years. But we have worked very closely together and done 2 very interesting books together. She initially contacted me in the summer of 22 and talked to me about her then nascent project, which has since been born. You can, here it is.
This is the book that we worked on together.
Women in the Wild. And she very kindly asked me to write a chapter for the book about our turtle girl, J. Vijaya, who I worked with and who was a friend of mine. And I also very kindly refused, saying this kind of biographical writing needs some distance and some objectivity. And I felt that because I had been so close to Viji, and a friend of hers, I would not be able to do a good enough job. But Anita, among her other qualities, is that she's very persistent and she doesn't give up. So she didn't give up, about which now I am very glad that she didn't, because it gave me the opportunity to get to know Vijaya's work in a bit more detail and to also validate a person who was a truly extraordinary woman in the wild, Viji.
Truly, I mean, I think Viji is an extraordinary individual, and I think the cover of this book, which I showed, and I want to show it to you again, is really special to me because it was this picture that caught my attention. I think it was must have been like 10 years ago. I think there was a picture of, this very picture was carried in Sanctuary magazine. And I was like, very taken with it. I was like, who is this girl? Looks so intelligent, so interesting, and where she was looked so intriguing. So I wanted to find out more, and I started reading up about Viji's life, and I was fascinated because her life was very short. She died tragically young, but having accomplished so much in so few years. And so when I started this, I run a book imprint with Juggernaut called Indian Pitta Books, and we bring out books about birds, wildlife, natural history for both older and younger readers. And I was very keen to do a book to bring Viji's story to life. And so it was this picture that was the hook for the whole book, and it is a happy coincidence that the picture also made it to the cover of the book. And in a sense that, so I started finding out more about Viji's life. I reached out to Zai, and then I realized that there were so many other women doing such incredible work in wildlife and doing different work in different landscapes. And I said, why not then do a book that brings together all these stories, which is, I think, going to be so inspiring for so many younger women also aspiring to enter the field, for young students who are interested in wildlife but who don't know how to, to be a part of this. So that's how the book came about. So I sat about making a long list of names. The list was very long. There are so many women doing work. But we had to, because my publisher said we only have a certain budget, we can't print more than an X number of pages, so we could only then write about a certain number of women. So we had to make it a list of about 10, 12 women. And we chose women whose work had had a substantive impact on species and landscapes, whose work had helped to save a species, to discover a species, whose work has helped to protect a habitat for animals. So using that, managed to sort of bring it down to 12, 13 women who are profiled in the book. And that was really the way this book sort of came about. And here I'm going to ask Zai. I mean, she's worked with so many women in the field, in the wild, at the Crocodile Bank that Zai runs. So I want to ask her about, among all the women that she has worked with, who does she find very inspiring? Who really stand out for her?
Well, that's a difficult one because there are so many. But I will just introduce you to somebody I haven't really talked about or written about much. But while we were discussing this question, I thought I really should. Around 84 or 85, 1984, 85, this young girl, school girl at that time, came to us from the ashram school in Pondicherry, Pondicherry is just a short drive from the Croc Bank. And she said, "Ma'am, I want to study sea turtles." So I said, okay, that's a great ambition, but you're too young right now. Come back after you're 18, and then you can volunteer at the Croc Bank. And we sort of forgot about it, but she did come, and with her parents' blessings. And she came back again and said, "Sea turtles, remember?" And at that time, we were on our way to the Andaman Islands on a ship. In those days, there were no flights to the Andaman, so you had to go in this big, rusty ship full of rats and cockroaches. And so we said, "Would you like to come with us?" Because we were going to visit a person called Satish Bhaskar, who is the Mr. Sea Turtle of India, a brilliant, inspirational field biologist. And so Manjula came with us on the ship, turned out to be a very good babysitter for our two sons so that we could go off and do our own thing, and spent months with Satish Bhaskar on Little Andaman studying the leatherback turtle nesting area there. She was a young girl in this totally wild place. There were still Shompen around with, bows and arrows, the Shompen tribe. And she turned out to be incredibly feisty and courageous, I would say. Slept in her sleeping bag on the beach next to Satish Bhaskar, a man she hardly knew, and wrote fascinating reports back from there. She went from level to level in sea turtle conservation and sea turtle study, and today she is a senior research fellow and administrator of the Sea Turtle Monitoring, Ecological Monitoring Association in Florida, attached to NOAA. NOAA is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Research Center in America. So she's reached the top of her field. And there were many such young people, both men and women, girls and boys, students as well as people in mid-career who, after years of being an engineer or something else, journalist, had decided that they wanted to work in conservation, who spent several months, sometimes more, at the Croc Bank, went away inspired, and went off to a much more interesting life, though of course not very financially, because you don't earn a lot as a conservationist. So that was Manjula. Apart from the Manjula type of person who sort of was dedicating her life to the field and to conservation, there were a lot of other women working with us in the office who would, at the drop of a hat, be ready to go off to Gujarat or Madhya Pradesh or Tripura, sent on little missions to go find some rare reptile or other creature or habitat. So these were the people who straddled both worlds. They worked in the office, they did whatever needed to be done in the office, but they were also happy to be in the field. So we mustn't forget them either.
Yeah. True. I mean, there's so many different journeys of people who come into the field, and that's something I just want to touch upon, about some of the other women who are featured in the book. And before I jump into talking about some of them, I just want to comment on the kind of journeys they had. I mean, not all of them grew up like Manjula did, with a single-minded focus on wanting to work on sea turtles. There's a lady called Vidya Atreya who works on leopards, who trained in mathematics. And it is only after she finished her graduation she decided that she actually wanted to work in wildlife. And then there was another lady called Divya Karnad, whom I wrote about, who works on the coast, who works with fishing communities and with wildlife in the seas. And she wanted to be a vet, but just before, I think, her board exams, she got chickenpox, and she didn't do very well in her board exams, and she couldn't make the grade for veterinary college. But what is a loss to veterinary science was a great contribution to wildlife sciences, because she done some incredible work in conserving sea life. And so, I mean, for all the young people out here, I mean, there is no linear way to do this. You don't have to necessarily be a biologist or study zoology. I think what really is important is your passion and your drive and your interest in working with animals, understanding conservation, trying to protect nature. I think that fire is more important than any academic qualification that you need to have. And I think that passion, that kind of energy and enthusiasm is what sort of characterizes so many of the women that we've written about in the book. And something that strikes me when I look back at the profiles that we carried in the book is that all these women worked so closely with local communities when they do their work. I mean, they don't study wildlife in isolation. They all work with the communities that live with the wildlife, because you and I live in cities, and we helicopter in, and we try to, people try to stage an intervention and say this is how we fix the problem. But really, if you want conservation to succeed, I think my belief is that you need to work with people who are going to be living permanently in that landscape. Either you permanently become part of the landscape, or you train people and work with people who will be part of that landscape. I'll talk about with Divya's example, the same lady who failed to become a vet but became a wildlife biologist instead. So she also started off studying turtles, and she started off studying how sea turtles, especially olive ridleys, when they hatch, the lights of cities dazzle them, and instead of heading into the ocean after hatching as they're supposed to, instead start walking towards the land, which effectively means death for them, because if the sea means life, land means death for these turtles that live all their life in water. So when she was studying this at a very remote beach in Orissa, she encountered a very angry group of fishermen who were very upset with her. And they told her, she asked them, why were they so angry? And they told her, they said, you people come here. As a result of your work, we can't fish in these waters for 6 months of the year. Who's going to give us jobs? He said, we are not trained to do anything else. And that's when Divya realized that if she wanted to really succeed in conserving life in the ocean, she had to work with the communities that live off the ocean. And her work has sort of been shaped by that. And I'll give you an example. So how many of you in this audience eat seafood? Okay, that's a fair number. Okay. And the funny, what Divya told me when I was writing this essay was that she said, we eat what finds its way to restaurants, to your tables, to shops and supermarkets is a very small percentage of the fish that's actually caught in the oceans. The number is like 1/5 or even less than that, if my memory is right. The rest of it is just wasted. I mean, that's like buying 10 kilos of vegetables and eating just 1 kilo and throwing the 9 kilos in the trash. And that's because it's not because the other fish are not edible. It's just that we don't know how to consume them. We don't know how to cook them. And the recipes to cook them have all vanished. With cultures, there are very few people who know how to cook with all these different kinds of fish that fishermen catch. And as a result, all of it goes wasted. These are truths and realities that you realize only when you start working with communities. So maybe the solution to overfishing may be to help consumers consume everything that is caught, rather than trying to say that don't eat seafood. Those kind of conversations don't work. So she's now trying to work with consumers to educate people about how to consume fish, what kind of fish to not consume in certain seasons, because she runs this wonderful website called In Season Fish, which all of you who eat fish may want to go have a look at it, which tells you on which coast of India which fish to eat and which fish to avoid in different seasons, because when fish breed, it's best not to catch them, because that affects the populations and future generations. So it's a wonderfully simple idea, and it's a very easy website to use. You just go in, you put in the month, and you put in the coast, and it tells you what you can eat, what you can't eat. And so she's trying to educate consumers. She's trying to work with chefs to create recipes for fish that are thrown away as bycatch. And she's working with fisher people as well to try and conserve. So it's a work that spans many different ideas. So, you just don't need to be trained in science. You need to learn to work with people. You need to learn to communicate. You need to have a much broader understanding, which is why I said it's not a linear profession in many ways. But, Divya's work and the work of all the people that we, wrote about, I think there are so many fascinating stories, and I'm going to turn to Zai and ask her about women who work in herpetology. And herpetology, as you know, is the study of reptiles, and it's a field that it's an unusual profession by any standards. So I'm going to ask her a little bit about the women who work in herpetology and the figures that she'd like to talk about.
Well, there are more and more women working in herpetology. Oh, sorry. Some of them, like me, are rather dumb. But when I started, now I'm not a scientist, and to go back to the chicken pox and exam, I didn't have chicken pox, but I never did well in an exam. So, how many of you sitting here do well in exams and tests? You do. Not many hands. What about all you kids over here, do you think you do well? Not much? Okay. Well, what I want to tell you is that you don't have to do well in exams and tests. And a lot of people I know who are great herpetologists and great conservationists and great, people working for wildlife in this country at this very, very important time when we're struggling with climate change and we need more and more of you youngsters to join this field. Most of them, I would say, were not good test and exam takers. In fact, many of them had flunked out of college. Satish Bhaskar, D. Basu, these are all big names in herpetology. They did not finish their education, but they had that one thing that Anita was talking about, is passion and commitment. So don't let that ever discourage you, because as long as you persevere, persist, you're committed, you will do it and you will get to the top. And by top, obviously I don't mean financially, but top in the sense of our own self-worth and who we are and what we want to achieve in life. That is much more important than how much money we have in the bank, right? Okay.
So, going from there, so we're just going to talk a little bit more about the kind of qualities of people, of the women who are featured in the book, and what makes them successful at what they do. So I see a lot of young women in the audience, so I want to ask them, how many of you in this audience think that women work more cooperatively and work better in teams than men do? I'm so glad to see that there's some male hands also being risen. Come on. Yes, I think that's very true,
Yeah,
and I agree. You're 100% right. I think one thing that really stands out for women in this... Okay, I guess I'm causing a lot of angst by this question, so not intended. So what I mean to say is that one quality that sort of unifies all the women featured in Women in the Wild was how they knew how to work with each other and work with others. I think there's an angry buzz coming from all the men who are not counted. So, we'll make it up to you in the second half of the session. So, there's a great kind of spirit of equality and cooperation that characterized them, and they all spoke so much about their team members. And I think if you speak to women, it's never about what I did or what I accomplished. We talk to men lots of times about what I did, what I got, what I made, what I won. But I think women tend to be more cooperative and tend to share the credit. And in fact, all the women wanted to list all their field assistants, all their research team members. And we had to say, no, we just can't keep running lists of names in the book. But they said, no, I said, it's not about what we did, but what we accomplished together as a team. And I think that's really an important characteristic that makes the women in this book kind of stand out. And a lot of the times, these women were criticized by others for being too emotional. There's a term called wearing your heart on your sleeve, which is to show the world exactly what you're thinking. If you're sad, you show it. If you're angry, you show it. If you're upset and disappointed, you show it. And is that a bad thing? Is it a good thing to show your emotions or a bad thing? What do you think? It depends, and that's a man speaking. So no, I'm just kidding. No, what I mean to say is a lot of the time we are taught I think the society expects us to sort of get on with it and not show your heart on your sleeve. But for a lot of the women, their passion for their work meant showing emotion. And there's this famous scientist called Jane Goodall who worked in Africa with chimpanzees, and she was criticized heavily for naming the chimps that she worked with. They said this is an unscientific way of doing things. is that how can you can't develop, emotions towards them. It will affect your scientific quality of your observation. I think she did so much to raise awareness about the need to conserve the species that this whole debate is quite pointless in terms of the emotion. And I think, as she says later in her writing, that it is her emotions that feed her science. And I think that's true for a lot of the women in the field. So as young people, feel strongly for what you want to do, and I think don't be afraid to show that. I think that's what a lot of the women in this book say, and that's what I really wanted to share. But as I said earlier, this is a field and a career that's incredibly complex with many kinds of ups and downs, highly challenging. It's not a regular 9 to 5 kind of job. So, and Zai spent so much time in the field herself, in some crazy geographies and remote areas, and had some amazing adventures. So I'm going to really turn around and ask her what were her highest and the lowest points in her career in the field.
Excuse me, Anita ma'am. We are actually short of time, so we need to make things fast.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. We are running short of time. How much time do we have? We have 5 more minutes. Oh, okay.
Rambling on.
All right. We shall accelerate.
Okay. Shall we jump to scaling up?
Yeah, I think so. We've been told that we have just 5 more minutes. So we want to talk about another book that Zai wrote, which is called Scaling Up. And that's really about, Zai would like to talk a little bit about scaling up and what it's about.
Yeah. So again, coming back to Anita's persistence, she then decided that I should write a book, taking off on an earlier book I had written, a biography of my ex-husband called Snake Man. And the Snake Man is Rom Whitaker, who is known as the Snake Man of India. And so she suggested that I take the story forward and rewrite some of the earlier bits and write about what happened with me and the Crocodile Bank and our other projects after we became divorced. So again, I was reluctant and quite rude sometimes, but she never gave up. And so the book came to pass, and I'm very grateful to you, Anita.
Well, it's a wonderful book. I think if anybody is interested in conservation and about the story of reptile conservation, which is fascinating, I think it's a must-read book. And I'm going to ask Zai some rapid-fire questions about the book. Some of these things are talked about in the book. But so this is like a little teaser for you to know what she wrote about.
I hate rapid fire, but anyway.
But that's okay. So now we've been told we have just 4 minutes, so it has to really be rapid fire.
Rapid.
So what's your scariest moment in the field?
I would say that one of the scariest was certainly running into an elephant in Amravati at night when we were collecting crocodile nests. And we saw this eye in our torchlight that we thought was a firefly, but it was an elephant. And it was one of the moments that tests your loyalty to your spouse, because I just pushed Rom aside and ran for my life.
Well, that was scary and funny, but I have a second question. What's your funniest moment in the field?
Maybe in the snake park, certainly when we opened a crate with a python in it that had been sent to us by Kenneth Anderson, who was also a natural history writer. So people used to send us Christmas presents like, here's a huge python I can't take care of, so you can have it. Merry Christmas. So I was right there when it was opened, and this python just sprang out and almost bit me on the eye. And the people who were there still talk about how hilarious it was, how I jumped back with my feet in the air and, so on. But I did manage to escape. One of those moments that's funny later, but horrible at the time.
But very funny for everybody who's watching you, clearly. So it's something that you'll never do again.
Walk barefoot in the dark.
Okay. And what's your favorite species of snake?
Well, I don't like snakes that bite. And I would go for the red sand boa choice, right?
Yeah. Okay, so that's the end of rapid fire. Do you want to do the reading or should we move to audience Q&A? You do the reading or we all
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to end this session with a short reading. We asked Zai to read one of her favorite passages from Scaling Up. It's a very short passage.
Do we
so
have
read
time?
that. It's a short passage.
Yeah, sure, ma'am, please.
So we'll read from that.
So I'm going to read from Scaling Up. This isn't the cover, by the way. I've covered it with newspaper because I'm such a modest person. So this is about a Sri Lankan crocodile survey that we did in 77 or 78. The most interesting encounter of the survey was not with crocodiles, but with old Modele Peter, a toothless burgher of Dutch descent, who was one of the regular croc catchers in the 1940s when it was legal. Even now, in his 60s, he would take on jobs to catch nuisance crocodiles for the local government agent. He and his family sat with us under coconut trees in front of his house in Batticaloa, and he told us how they caught giant gourami fish by wading into abandoned croc tunnels. Peter also amazed us with his tales of catching mugger in the same way. He'd spot an active croc tunnel and then crawl into the half-submerged slimy hole with a rope but no light. Gingerly feeling around in front of him, he would contrive to slip the rope around the crocodile's body. Crocodiles, like most reptiles, are quite ticklish, and a gentle prod will make one raise its body just enough to slip the rope under. Tying a secure knot on it, Peter would back out of the tunnels, resembling one-way streets, and he and his stalwarts would haul on the rope, bring the crocodile to the tunnel's mouth, and axe it to death. One of Peter's favorite stories was about the crocodile that didn't want a rope around itself and forced its way out of the tunnel the only way it could, over Peter. He showed us the claw marks on his back, a reminder of this adventure. People like him and our wanderings in what was then prime habitat with healthy mugger populations gave us some idea of what parts of our own country must have been like before the hunters and burgeoning human development got in on the act.
So we have time for a couple of questions if anybody has them.
I actually really wanted to know your thoughts. Now that we've been speaking about women in the wild, I also agree that they make better conservationists among the other professions that they excel far more than men do. I'm just out of, participating in the COP29. I was joining from India, drawing cartoons about the meetings. And one of the incidents that struck me was that the world leaders, when they gathered for a group photo, 77 of the 80 of them were men. And we all know what a disaster it has turned out to be. I feel, I don't know if this is statistically proven, but it's my personal opinion that women make better conservationists because they're also a more vulnerable gender to climate change and to biodiversity loss and to the worsening state of the environment all over. What are your thoughts about it? And can literature, overcome this?
I think that's a very valid observation, and I think women's livelihoods are in many ways more impacted by climate change. They're the ones who have to feed the children at home. So if they cannot go out and say fish because it's flooded, can't farm because it's too saline, I think they feel the pinch. Men seem to find recourse to drink and liquor and other such things very easily and forget about the state of the world. Women are not able to leave their troubles behind at the door so easily. So I think, yes, emotionally and I think physically and financially, women bear the burden of climate change. I don't have a statistic for it, but I think it's borne out anecdotally. And yeah, and I agree. I think if COP had more women leaders, I suspect that we'll have a agreement on our hands. Does it answer your question?
But I want to know what part literature you think that literature would play.
That part, yeah, I think so. I think stories are really important. I think we all grow up with stories, right? And they form our ideals, they form our aspirations, they shape our ambitions. So if we read about these narrations, be it about climate change or about inspiring women, I think it can change what we want to do with our lives for younger people and even for older people to course correct, to be inspired to make a change at however small the level of change may be. I think narratives and storytelling are a big part of how we think. And I think that's why they have such an important role, not just for children, but also for grown-ups. Yeah.
Thank you, Anita.
Thank you.
Hi. Can I ask a question or if it's
Yeah, sure,
balanced?
sure.
This is for Zai. You were asked which is your funniest moment, most scary moment. But I want to ask you which is your most memorable moment as a woman that made you emotional, happy emotional, which made you think that all the work I've put towards, you've dedicated to your life towards this. So this is worth it. Was there a moment for you like
I
that?
think one of those moments were when the Tamil Nadu Forest Department gave us permission to collect wild crocodile eggs. That was a huge moment for us. So I was very happy about that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, speakers. That was a very wonderful conversation.
I
Kudos.
just have one little question to ask and a show of hands. How many of you young people sitting here are now, in this time of your life, feeling inspired to work for conservation? Climate change, conservation, wildlife. Okay, that's a nice... It's a nice number. Yeah.
Thank you all for being a part of this wonderful session.